There's a building in town. Which is really fun.
I want to welcome everybody to our missional community learning with Todd Morr. I have to say, Todd, we really appreciate you. In fact, before we even start this thing, Todd is not from here. I'm sure some of you you know that because we've been on these calls with him.
I'll tell you more later.
He talks to people all over the world. The other day when we were on a missional community cohort call, he was talking about how, talking to some like Russian pastors who were on a tank or something like that. And I'm just like, I don't talk to cool people like that. But Todd does. And he is from California. We'll forgive him for that. Well, I don't know if you're not originally from California, right? But he lives in California. But
I don't claim California.
You're in Oklahoma. You're more at home here probably. So, but we're so thankful to have Todd here to talk about things that God has been teaching him as they he's been a part of planting in some family of churches, and Soma Tacoma, you called there, and what's the church called that you're planting now? New City Church in San Diego, right? Yeah, which is really pretty, and we're jealous, but they're not jealous of California, just San Diego. So anyway, I'd like to pray for us, and then Jimmy's going to come and share a little bit about the vision and his heart in this. So let's pray together. Father, we want to thank you so much for this time that we have together. I just want to pray for a strong presence of your Holy Spirit in this room. Lord, we don't call this the upper room because we don't expect you to move. Father, we want to see you move in this place this morning, and we want to see you move in our hearts. We're all people who are in varying degrees of leadership in church, and we're here because we desperately desire to make disciples and to reach people with the gospel. So, Father, I pray this morning you would use Todd's gift, Lord, the apostolic gift he has, the entrepreneurial church planning just genius that is in him, Lord, that you've been building over these years, and maybe learn from that, maybe be able to glean, and Lord, just bring out of us the gifts that you have for us from the Holy Spirit, but also just greater ability to lead and to organize and strategize. We pray these things in Jesus' name. We also want to pray your anointing on Todd. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Nick. Would y'all give Nick a hand for opening up his and I think we're going to get some of that good coffee served downstairs.
There's already some back here.
Okay, good deal. I was first put in contact with Todd a little over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, in my efforts as leading church planting in Oklahoma with Oklahoma Baptist, through the desire to help our new churches in particular. That's what I was working with, make disciples. Jesus never said to go plant churches. He never said that. We don't have any scriptures where he said to go plant churches, but he did say go make disciples. And one of the things that I felt like we drifted from was we were out to start church services, but we weren't out to make disciples. We were hoping discipleship would happen kind of by default. But a lot of times we doesn't do that. In fact, I'll just say this, as Baptists, we were really good about making good church members. Maybe not even good church members, but good church members less good at making disciples. And so I was on this hunt for about 6 months, reading, talking to, doing everything I could to find out who was making real followers of Jesus and what does that look like. And in that search, I ended up centering on the Soma family of churches. I said, I need to talk to the guy that's best known and can do what we need, and that is to help make people into followers of Jesus. And who did I get in contact with? This guy right here, Todd Morr. They put me in contact with Todd. So Todd and I have been working together for the last 2.5 years, and he's been the secret sauce in church planting right now. So the secret's out. You know the secret sauce. It's Todd Morr. So, we started doing cohorts, trying to understand what missional community was, missional community life was. And it really boils down to a few things. One is relationships. Everything that Jesus did with his disciples and his apostles was out of
the relationship he had with them. The life change flowed through the life-on-life relationship with that. It can't be programmed. It wasn't that was the program, was the life-on-life relationship. The Holy Spirit, His power flows from one person to another through that, and from God through that. And so you see that in the ministry and life of Jesus. You see that in the book of Acts. You see that in Paul's letters to Timothy and others. It's all about that. And so Todd was and Soma was a fresh, cool drink of water in an arid place in my life. And so we've been working with him for a couple of years now, a little over a couple of years, with the missional community concept. And I'll tell you what, COVID-19 and missional communities go together, don't they? I mean, those of you that have missional communities going on before COVID hit, you continued on. A lot of churches just ground to a halt in many ways, and it survived because this is God's plan for that. So I'm just really thankful for Todd and thankful for what he's done for us and how he's helped, and you're going to enjoy hearing from him. But he would like to hear from you first. And what he would like to hear is if we could do this, kind of go around and share, and I would like to start in the back if we could. Just share, like Michael, I'll start with you, Michael. Just share your name and who you're with and about your familiarity with missional community. Is that good? Is that good? And let me before Michael does that, let me share that all of us have been challenged over this last year, not even the last year, the last 6 months or so, because of COVID and because of other things. I'm no exception to that. I used to work for Oklahoma Baptist, don't anymore, because of COVID-19, and so I got let go, and so I'm in a transition in my life as well. So I gave y'all pins of one group that I'm working with right now. So I'm doing a shameless promotion. I'm working right now with House of Healing. It's known primarily as an equestrian experience for troubled teenagers, and they're out in El Reno, and they're a great ministry if your missional community would like to adopt a ministry that can reach people for Christ, because these students and these parents and families, a lot of them are in a crisis mode. They're in a distress mode, and they're looking for help. And this ministry has a great thing. So if you love horses, if you love doing yard work, I'm not a big fan of yard work, but if you like riding a big tractor and you like doing edging and stuff like that, and getting out and getting sweaty and hot and all that, then this is a ministry for you guys, because there's a lot of property, a lot of ministry, a lot of work you can do, and also they can take your money as well. But I gave you some information about it. You can look them up online as well on that. So my life is shifted too. I'm still trying to figure out what God's next step is for me. It seems like God's next step is, Jimmy, just do tomorrow what you're supposed to do tomorrow. Do today what you're supposed to do today. Don't worry about anything else. And so just be where you're supposed to be. And I'll tell you today, you guys are supposed to be here, and I am so glad you're here. And so is Todd. So Michael, would you go ahead and kind of open us up and share that?
I remember 2 out of the 3 things.
Your name, who you're with, and your familiarity with missional community. Like, do you know much about it? Do you practice missional communities? All that. Just this is so where Todd will know where to kind of adjust his talk.
Absolutely. Michael Wilson. I'm with the Wyckoff Church. I'm the pastor, elder, planter, late dude over there. And we're in Northwest Oklahoma City. And as far as the missional community, we do that. That's fundamentally the core of Wyckoff Church. And we call it a gospel family. Gospel families are made up of 6 rhythms in which we follow in hopes to multiply. And that's that.
Great, thanks.
Scott Campbell with Christ Central Church, where I planted about 4 years ago, and so missional communities are our primary way of gathering and discipling our people.
Colin Swablin at Grace Harbor Church in Northwest Oklahoma City. We do have some missional communities. We are starting another one actually tonight.
Awesome.
Congratulations.
for you?
I'm Nathan, and I'm at Grace Harbor Church with Thomas, and what he said about missional communities, we've been praying for our communities to multiply, and we actually were kind of in the last week of training our leaders this past weekend, and realized like we've got 2 or 3 more families that want in this, and so we're starting that additional one tonight.
Cool.
My name is Micah White. I serve at Council Road Baptist Church, and I'm the group's pastor. And so I'm very interested in hearing how we can become more missional in our groups. So glad to be here.
Brady Sharp, Credence Church. We're 2 years old this week, so we're celebrating that. We've been working on building communities for a while now.
Where at?
In Lawton, Oklahoma. Yeah.
Well, I already sort of introduced myself, but Nick Tarter, and I pastor here. We planted this church, my wife and I, about 7 years ago, and through the Lord's providence, we ended up in this space. And actually, Council Road is our mother church, so in a way, I mean, Mike is kind of my mom. But we are. I was also working with Jimmy in church planting with Oklahoma Baptist, and just really excited about the opportunity to connect and see what kind of grassroots movement can come up for missional community ministry. It's been my heartbeat the entire. This is the reason why I planted church was for this, so I'm excited about it.
I'm Blake Taylor, church planter and resident with Credence Church under Pastor Brady Sharp, and I've been immersed in communities for our time there the last 8 months, learning more and more about that.
I'm Bryce Henry. I'm also with Credence Church. I don't know that I would say I have a particular role.
They've got a plan for you.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. My bride and I are in the process of doing core development.
Yeah, we're a part of our church plants core team.
Yeah, great.
Troy Riedel, also with Credence Church under Pastor Brady. I'm fairly new into the whole missional community, so I'm still learning.
Good.
I'm Darren Rice. Planted New Life Church in Newcastle, Oklahoma, and we're currently meeting there in our house, and then we've got some other groups now that are meeting with us thanks to COVID through Zoom. We've got one in Morr, Oklahoma, one in Claremore, Oklahoma, one in Guthrie, Oklahoma, and one in Weatherford, Oklahoma. So we're looking to try to really get missional in all those communities.
Where's Newcastle?
Newcastle is, let's see, basically it's straight south of here, about 30 minutes.
I'm Chris Solage. I came with Darren. I lead a nonprofit called Fahrenheit Rollout Mentoring. We started missional communities in Austria for 9 years, came back to Oklahoma where we're from, and we have work going on in Portugal, Austria, and we had Sri Lanka up until the COVID hit. So I would love to connect any of you guys with overseas work. So
We'll need to talk later. You'll hear in a second what my story is internationally.
This is Mike. We do Church Inside Out. We're 3 years old at the church plant in Sepulveda, Oklahoma, and went to the cohort with Todd this past year, which has been very encouraging. And we're actually moving towards house church missional communities, starting actually this. Probably start October, so that's where we're at. Yeah.
I'm Elijah. I'm also Church Inside Out. I'm his son.
Church planning resident.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Scott Carlson, Refuge of Wasso. We launched the Refuge on March the 1st. You can figure the rest of it out. And so I also am about to turn 58 here in a couple of weeks, and in my entire life, this meeting is a picture of it. Because I always come in early and I pick a seat and everybody sits somewhere else. So I'm coming after your seat back there later in the afternoon. Matter of fact, I might be coming there now. So we began about a year ago with the Missional Community Cohort, and tonight I had to make a big decision because I wanted to come this really bad, but tonight was our final night of our 9-week training for our first Missional Community group, and so my wife's leading that tonight. And so our goal is in about 6 weeks to start a second group out of what we got at our house, and there should be about 20 folks there tonight.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. Hey Nick, do you have another?
Is that one not working?
It's not working great.
I can find one for you. I got one downstairs.
Well, super fun to be here. First time in Oklahoma. But as Nick was saying, I'm not a Californian. My story is I grew up in central Illinois, just south of Peoria, small town, for all you small town folks. So I was in Illinois for the first 20 years. I went to school in Chicago at Moody Bible Institute and Wheaton College. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing for you, but so I was in Chicago for 6 years. I was at Willow Creek a couple years, so got to see small groups in a very large church context. But then God sent me to Europe, and I lived in Eastern Europe for 11 years, and we actually started working with missional community type groups. I lived in the Czech Republic for 7 of those years, Romania for 4 of those years, and that was starting 25 years ago. So I do a lot of work today in about 14 different European countries, as well as South Africa and Australia and Korea and Japan, a couple places in South America, but focused on variations of missional communities. So wherever you're at in this journey, one thing I wanted to say is don't let the name missional community throw you off. It's just I've seen lots of different names for this thing that I would say is a community of people trying to live life intentionally together on mission. So when you travel to different countries, our guys in Romania, they call them communities on mission. Translates well in the Romanian language. So it doesn't matter what the name is. What we're going to be talking about today is how do we form these so that people are actually living life together in such a way that's like Jimmy described. It's transformative, that it's helping people mature beyond how they might mature if they were just attending church. And so we really want to get to the substance of what life in a community looks like. So don't be distracted by the name. So I've seen them called lots of names. So call them life groups, call them home groups, call them small groups. But we want to wrestle through how we can organize them in such a way that people's lives are being more and more transformed, becoming more and more like Jesus, more and more fruitful on mission. So that's where we'll spend our time today and this evening. But I was in Europe those years, then moved from Romania, Timișoara, Romania, to Tacoma, Washington. So I became part of Soma Tacoma in the early years, helped start the Soma network of churches, which is about 50 churches now, helped start a resourcing platform called Saturate. That's an extension of Soma. And then 4 years ago moved from Tacoma down to San Diego, partially because we were working with a bunch of churches in Southern California, but it was hard to from a distance. And so that was part of the move. And then my wife is also from San Diego, so for her it was going back home. So we did that 4 years ago. We're part of a 5-year-old church plant called New City. We call them, so we don't call them mission communities, we call them gospel communities. So I started and lead one of those with a core team of people. It's a lot of what we'll be talking about today is core shared leadership of these communities. It's one of the biggest reasons why they don't go well in churches. is because they're being led by singular leaders or singular couples versus shared leadership with a group of people. So I lead my gospel community in La Mesa, which is part of San Diego, with 3 other couples. We've got a core of 4 couples, which is a bit of a dream. We're in a dreamy place right now, because having that much strength and that much capacity at the core of our gospel community makes the load light. So it's not stressful, it's not tiring, it's actually a joy to be on mission together with a community that has that kind of capacity and strength and maturity at the core of it. So we'll be talking, quite a bit about that. But wife, been married 19 years, got 5 kids. They all had their first day of school yesterday, so that was a big deal. So I had to miss the first day of school, but I got the pictures from the first day of school. So I've got a 16-year-old, 14-year-old, 11-year-old, 10-year-old, and 5-year-old. And so we've got a full house and a full life. Our gospel community has about 12, depending on how you count them. We've got 12 kids that are part of our gospel community at the core, but if some of our non-Christian relationships are at our house for a party or whatever, we can get up into the 15 to 18 kid, chaos. So yeah, it's highly, like Jimmy said, highly relational life. Both with our core and then the layer of baby Christians that are around our core, and then the non-Christian layer that is around that. So I'll just draw that out. I think that's an important consideration. I'll draw it out now. Is this a new one, Nick? Yeah. Okay. Just so I don't forget it or lose it for later, but in defining what a missional community is, or how I've seen this play out. So how I've seen this play out over the last 20 years, again, in 20 different countries, and I've probably worked with churches from 40 different states in the U.S., and another 10 cities in Canada. So if you want to hear some of that at some point, like some of the contextual realities of how this plays out in Russia, or how it plays out in Northern California, or different places, we can talk about that at some point. But basically what we're trying to get at when we think of these communities is a core of people, which I would say minimum of 4. I've just found that if you get less than 4, if you get 3, there's just honestly not much strength in that. And so I can't tell you how many churches I talk to that say our leaders are tired. I was with a church down in Norman last night. Guess what their big question was? Our leaders are tired, stressed out, semi-burned out. What do you think is the cause of that? And I said, well, one of the probably top 3 causes of that is this: a lack of real shared leadership at the core of your communities. And then as I said that, they nodded. They nodded in agreement to say, yeah, that is the case. We've either got one couple trying to lead it, or 2 singles trying to lead it, or whatever the combination, but it's just not enough strength. That core of people leading it does not have enough capacity to properly share what it takes to lead a community well. And if we were just, I told you I was at Willow Creek, and I work with a lot of churches that still have what we call like a traditional life group structure. If we were just talking about traditional small groups, and the expectation was just to pull off a Bible study once a week, like, that's easy. One person can do that. One couple can do that, if that's all the expectation is. But we're not talking about a Bible study, though we do study the Bible as part of it. We're talking about a life together. And that's the big shift for a lot of people. It's a big shift for a lot of churches, is the difference between a Bible study or a couple of activities that they do versus really seeing the community as a life together. So to live a life together that's integrated and intentional obviously takes some strength, it takes some capacity to do that. And that's why we need a community, that's why we need a core of people working at it together. A couple of the things that come into play, which we can dive into deeper if that'd be helpful at some point, but you've got gifting realities too. So as amazing as you guys might be, and with your spouses, you're still limited. I'm limited. My wife and I are limited. I do not have much shepherding motivation. It's just not how I'm wired. It's not how I see people. It's not how I see things. I'm more strategic in nature, more organizational in nature, more apostolic in nature, and so I'm usually pushing hard for mission. Like, what's the next thing? Where's the next neighborhood? Who are the next people? Let's go, guys. You know, let's take the hill. My wife, thankfully, is not that way. She's always asking, well, how do you think people are feeling about that? How do you think the group feels about that? She's always asking feeling questions. Heart, what do you think is going on in their hearts? You know, where do you think the motivation is for that? And so, but thankfully, it's not just on my wife and I. We've got these other couples that also have different gifts and different personalities and different perspectives that also speak into the life of our community. And we all need that. All of your people, all of your communities need that. They need the diversity of gifting, personality, story, maturity. They need that because there's strength in that. Does that make sense? And so, again, you're not going to get that if you have 2 or 3 people at the core of a community. There's just not enough gifting and maturity and strength to go around to lead a community that is a life together on mission. Okay? So minimum of 4, but you know, better, stronger, obviously, if you get up to the 5, 6, 7, 8 reality, which is what I have right now. So when I was in Tacoma all those years, we were more in this space. And it was hard at times. Even though we had a lot of experience, it was hard for my wife and I, with just 2 other people, to consistently lead our missional communities in a fruitful way. And so I'm really seeing the difference now because we've got a core of 8 people. And the shared reality of it is, it's great. I can't overstate it. The difference it makes by having that strength of core. So let me finish this thought. Then around that core, you have what you're going to call young or baby Christians. These are your young disciples that are, new in the faith, that you're hoping one day through the modeling you do with them, through the teaching you do with them, through the experience they have in this community as a life together, or someday, and there will be different, some of them will get there fast, some will get there over years, but the goal is to see eventually all those baby Christians become core mature. Does that make sense? Mature enough to someday be part of the core. And actually, this can happen sooner than later. This was a big question yesterday with this church down in Norman. Providence, I don't know if you know those guys. Jeremy Hager is the one who planted that. But they were saying, he, like most churches I talk to, again, say, we don't have enough leaders. We've got these communities, we want to start more communities, we don't have enough leaders. And I was like, I understand the question. Often what I see, though, is a lack of understanding of what it means to function as a core, because you don't have to be like super Christian to be part of a core. One of the 4 couples that's part of the core of my gospel community now, they've only been Christians for a few years. You would not put them in the mature Christian category. Okay? But they're part of our core because the responsibility is not on them. We're doing it together. They're safe, they're protected, so they can play a role as part of the core in their younger Christian kind of way. Does that make sense? But the growth that they're experiencing being part of the core rather than in this next ring is massive. The growth trajectory that they're on. So they've only been Christians a few years, but in many ways they are more mature than many Christians I've seen that have been in churches for 10, 15, 20 years. Could they answer all the Awana questions correctly? Probably not. Could they tick all the boxes, of the Bible quiz? Probably not. They've only been, Christians a few years. But are they week to week growing in their love for God and their love for their neighbors? Absolutely. So we have to redefine what it means to be able to be a helpful part of the core of a community. Does that make sense? Too many people we look at and say, oh, they're not ready. I was like, what do you mean by that? They're not ready for what? To be part of a group of people that are trying to love each other well and love their neighbors well. If they can do that, if they've got a hunger for that, if they've got a motivation for that, then they're ready. They're ready to be part of core leadership of a community. Does that make sense? Is their theology all buttoned up just right? No, not yet. That'll come. That'll come over time. But think about Jesus and the disciples. First year, his disciples, do you think all their theology was buttoned up? It was a mess. There were so many things they didn't understand. There were so many questions they didn't see clearly. But were they part of a core of a missional community? Absolutely. Because they were hungry, because they were passionate, because they were faithful, because they were ready to give their lives to this thing Jesus was calling them to, they were ready. So you've got to look at your people differently. This is what I challenged the church yesterday with down in Norman. I said, I want you to look at all of the people, current people in your missional communities, and I want you to reassess them. All of them. Top to bottom, I want you to reassess them. Because I said there's probably twice as many people currently in your missional communities that could be part of core leadership that you're not considering ready. Does that make sense? Because they haven't gone through your 2-year training thing and they can't, again, ace the Bible quiz. So you don't feel like they're ready. So you're not considering them even a possibility. And then you're complaining about not having enough leaders and not being able to start more communities. So actually the problem isn't your people usually. The problem is often you or us. Because again, we got to go back and look at Jesus' example. Okay? Think of where the disciples were when he called them into this community that was going to start living on mission together. And Jesus didn't have this 6-month, 12-month, 18-month ramp-up process either with his disciples. When he called them in Luke 5 to lay down their nets, which that was the big test. If your people are ready to lay down their nets, then they're ready. Okay? So in Luke 5, they lay down their nets, and what do? Does he then sit them down for the next 6 months to nail the theology? No, he's going to teach them along the way over the coming months and years. But what do? They get going. They get out, and literally the next day, you can't tell from the text the timing of it, but literally the next verse, in verse 10, he calls them to fish for men. And literally in the next verse, they're fishing for men. they go to this village and they start loving people and serving people and healing people and talking with people seemingly the next day after they lay down their nets. Okay? And then they just continue to do that the rest of the chapter. Okay? So literally it seems like he calls them weak. They've already hit a few different villages learning to love people. So that's the big test for you as you think about your people. Do we have, if our people are wanting, if there's a motivation to love people, then they're ready. Then they're ready to be part of a core, which is going to give you then the ability to have stronger missional communities and multiply more missional communities, because this is what's required to grow and multiply missional communities. It's core leadership. It's not just raw numbers. Okay? Here's the other ring then. It's the non-Christians, and we'll get to more about that later. But in order to be able to multiply, what do you think you need? Could my missional community, based on what I'm saying, could we multiply in a healthy way next week? What would you say? Potentially.
Yes.
Yes? Why? How? How would we do it?
You can split your core.
That
was actually my question. When you get to 8, obviously you have to have somebody else who can lead the next core, but you're just looking for a minimum of 4 in your mind.
Exactly.
So how long have you been at 8 in your group?
So we've been at 8 for about 6 months.
And just in your thinking, how would you assess your readiness to send them out?
Well, if they, again, we're ready. They're ready. And we're actually talking about some different variations of multiplication right now, because we can, because we've got the strength and maturity and capacity to do it. So very easily, we had to. If we felt like the timing was right, we could multiply and start a new missional community over here by moving that core in that direction, and then some babies, we would determine who's in proximity to each other. We would take that into consideration. We would take their gifting into consideration. We would take their relational depth into consideration, like who's more deeply connected with who. But we would have these younger Christians then also spread into those two missional communities. But in order so you can see how important this whole core idea is. Because I'm talking with churches all the time, they're like, man, we need more communities. We don't, again, the conversation's connected. We need more communities, we don't have enough leaders, and it comes back often to assessing the readiness of their people differently. It's not to say that sometimes there isn't some training and some experiential stuff that comes into play to get them more ready. But often the case, like I said, is I think a wrong assessment or wrong perspective about what it takes to be part of core leadership. Because again, the fastest, most effective way for you to develop new leaders is to get them here. This isn't bad for them to be participating in a missional community as a young Christian, but in terms of like pipeline and speed of development, the fastest, most fruitful way to do that is to get more of your people into core leadership as quickly as possible. Does that make sense? Because what they get here, that doesn't mean that they get pulled into core leadership and all of a sudden they're going to be attending a bunch of meetings. What's going on here, like I've got this young couple, Ramiro and Amanda, that are part of my gospel community right now, and what they're getting that is so transformative in their life right now is modeling an experience. They're getting, if they were out here in this room, they would be getting some of that because we live a lot of life together as a missional community, but they're getting a big dose of it because they're part of the core. Because they're in those regular conversations with our core that is saying, how do we lead this? How do we lead these people? How do we shepherd these people? How do we go on mission? How do we do those things effectively? So Ramiro and Amanda, even though they've only been Christians a few years, they get to be part of those conversations regularly, but they get to also see it modeled more deeply, and they get a deeper experience of it. So they're getting there's some formal training pieces sprinkled in along the way for sure, but the most transformative stuff for them and for others is the modeling and the experience, of that. So let me give you an example. Because of COVID and because of California restrictions, we can't, our gospel communities aren't doing anything inside really right now, but because the weather's nice and because we can in San Diego, we're doing a lot at the park right now. So actually we're gathering with our larger body at a park every Sunday morning, but our gospel community has said every other Sunday afternoon we're going to go to the park with a bunch of our non-Christian families that we're on mission to. So 2 Sundays ago, we were at the park. Ramiro and Amanda, these younger core believers, were at the park, and we've got 4 different non-Christian families there at the park with us. So first of all, for Ramiro and Amanda, just think about what's going on in their heart and mind in that situation. Okay? We're going to the park, we're having fun, there's food there, the kids riding scooters, we're playing some frisbee, some volleyball. But for Ramiro and Amanda, they're seeing and they're feeling like we're having a lot of fun here as a community, but there's something bigger going on than fun at the park. There's this bigger purpose going on. There's non-Christians here that we're trying to love towards Jesus. So that's like the first big thing, okay, is developing that conviction, vision for lost people. It's like, wow, there's 4 non-Christian families here. But then those non-Christian families, because we've been investing in them for some months, when they came into the space that we were sitting around at the park, they sat down. One of the non-Christian single moms sat down right beside Amanda. And so immediately, again, because she's seen it, what do you think she did? What do you think she did? Huh?
She began to have a conversation.
Yeah.
She began to listen to stories.
Well, what do we do when non-Christians are around with us at the park, or at the party, or at the game night? What do? We engage them. We ask them questions. We take a genuine interest in them. We love them well. Amanda started doing it immediately. It was beautiful. So if you think about what's going on again in her discipleship, in her maturing, she's getting it. Just like Jesus immediately took the disciples on the road to love people. They needed to feel it. They needed to see it modeled. And then later in actually Luke 5 in that chapter, I love it because, he calls Matthew, the tax collector, to follow him. Well, again, very soon, I don't know if it was the next day or later that week, but Matthew has this big party at his house. And who was there? House full of tax collectors and sinners. But who else was there? The disciples with Jesus. Okay? So it was just like us being at the park with these 4 non-Christian families. Okay? Our people are learning to love lost people, hurting people, and doing it together. It's not individual mission, it's we're doing it together. We're at the park, or we're at this party in our backyard, but we're learning to love these people, talk with these people, get to know their story, build trust with them, leading to Jesus, and we're doing it together. So I think that's what we see starting in Luke 5, and then we see play out in the rest of the Gospels. So we have to wrestle with that same picture and say, how do we create those environments like Jesus created at Matthew's house? How do we create those environments with our people? Again, that's where the most transformative stuff is going to come for our people. It's at the parties. It's not sitting in a classroom in your church building talking about mission and evangelism. It's been part of the, I think, real weakness of the church historically has been a lot of talking about evangelism and mission and very little experience of actual loving people and proclaiming to people. So the most transformative stuff, I've already said it, I'll keep saying it, the most transformative stuff in the lives of your people is going to come through them being in an environment like Matthew's house or at the park where they're actually experiencing loving people. And you love people in different ways. So during that time at the park, there was a lot of kids in play. So a lot of these non-Christian families they all had kids. So their kids were interacting with our kids. Well, part of loving these families well was loving their kids. So that's part of what our community was learning and growing in, 2 weeks ago. Was, okay, these families came into this situation. We want to engage them in conversation and getting to know their story and asking them good questions. We want to do that, but part of it is just loving their kids well also. So playing volleyball and including their kids. Throwing a frisbee and including their kids. That's another way we love people, love families, is by having fun with them and including them and helping them feel safe and protected. And does that make sense? So, okay, I've been talking a lot. When you hear all this, what questions do you have? What challenges do you see in it? You can take this.
I got a question.
Take this any direction that would be helpful for you.
Okay, so I grew up incredibly traditional Southern Baptist. Incredibly traditional Sunday school, young adult class, middle-aged adults, senior adults. So I got 20 people coming over to my house right now in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And as we start gearing toward starting a new group, naturally, I know the natural tendency, if I just left it up to them without the core really understanding, they're going to split young and old. Yeah. And so while we're in this teaching foundational time, how would you encourage, because I was taking notes here about, giftedness, their relations and stuff like that. How, and maybe, I don't know whether it's God's will or not, but how do I get them to not do what I just said, younger and older, as we start a new crew? Because in my opinion, the younger need the older need the younger. Yeah. They've got it's got to be in the DNA. But would you speak toward that as far as just get ready to start another group?
Yeah. So this is not so. One of the things about leading a church of missional communities is you got to be very creative. You got to be very flexible, and you've got to learn to customize. I told the guys in Norman last night, it's like Norman is you can talk about Norman as a city, and it's got certain characteristics that are true, but there are many different pockets of life in a place like Norman, or here in Bethany even, okay? There are pockets of reality that are younger, that are older, that are richer, that are poorer, that are blacker, that are whiter, all of that. And so part of the beauty of it, but for a lot of leaders, because they've been kind of one size fits all in their approach to small groups and even mission. More of a one size fits all. This is a challenge for a lot of church leaders, because it's the opposite of cookie cutter. It's the opposite of one size fits all. It requires significant customizing, because every core of people leading one of these is different. It's a different group of people. They have different stories. They have a different number of kids or no kids. They could be singles with, unmade. So you've got all kinds of variables in play just at the beginning of who's part of the core. And then you've got all kinds of variables in play based on their lifestyle, what neighborhood they live in, what their workplace is, what their work schedule is, what their hobbies are. You've got all kinds of things in play there that need to be taken into consideration. And then there's the other layer. You've got all kinds of variables in play as to who the non-Christians are that they're in relationship with, that have their schedules and have their kids or no kids, and so you've got all these variables in play. Do you see that? That need to be considered in the customizing of helping a missional community say, how do we live together faithfully, taking all these things into consideration? So how do we faithfully love each other as a family, first of all, as a family of believers, and then how do we faithfully do that as an extended family that moves out together on mission? But you see how it requires the customizing. A lot of churches I work with who struggle with customizing, it's not a surprise that they struggle, that their groups struggle. Because if you try to make it one size fits all, or just have a few options of what your missional communities can look like, and you give them a prescribed template of what it could, it's just not going to go very well. There's too many variables that are going to constantly conflict with your prescribed method. Does that make sense? So part of that, one of those variables is age or life stage. But I think in discipleship, as much as possible, diversity is a good thing. Youngers need olders. Olders need youngers. Families with kids need families without kids. Families without kids need. So there is incredible learning that happens when we're living life regularly with people different than us. I see churches that like to segment it, so their groups will be for teens, and then their groups will be for college, and then their groups will be for women, and then their groups will be for men. And it's like, if you organize things like that, there's just a lot missing, So you think about a traditional church that has women's ministry, and they've got women's groups. It's not a bad thing, obviously. It's better than nothing. But don't those women need the input and influence of men? And all those men's groups that are purely male focused, wouldn't they benefit a whole lot by having female input into all things, about life? Absolutely. Okay, I hope we agree that that's kind of obvious, but it's interesting that we're so quick to segment, but we do that because it's easier. It's easier to do it that way. It's easier to control it. It's easier to organize it. It's cleaner, safer. You organize it, do the men's thing, you go home, versus asking the question, no, what is actually the best thing for our people? Is it going to be a little messier? Absolutely. Is it going to be a little harder work? Absolutely. Is it going to be best and more fruitful for our people, though? Absolutely. So that's why we're going to commit to seeing our communities be diverse, male, female, young, old, rich, poor, kids, no kids, all of that, because everybody benefits the most from it when we function in that way. And we can come back to that and give you some examples of that. So one of the big, I know Scott heard, we've talked about this plenty, but one of the things I feel is that's most important in all this is that proximity matters. So with groups, when groups form around proximity, that is usually, doesn't have to be 100% of the time, but usually the best way. So that's where young and old aren't even going to come into play, like how should we form these groups? So we're going to ask the question, who lives life close to who? And believing that God is actually sovereign and purposeful in where He's placed people to sleep at night. Like, you don't live where you live just because the rent's great, or the schools are good, or the parks are great. You don't, that's not in God's, it's not how God moves His people around. You live where you live, you work where you work, you play where you play, because God desires for you to bring influence there. There's purpose in where you live, whether it's a tiny apartment over here, and you don't even like your apartment. But there's purpose in it. God's placed you there for this time, however long that time is, for you to bring influence there. So if that's true, that He's sovereign in where each of your people lay down at night, then you have to say, okay, so then we're going to form our communities around where people live so that they can again be good family, live a lot of life together. If the goal, if we believe in discipleship, that we've already said multiple times, comes from this deep, regular life together, we have to say even logistically, how can we organize it in such a way for that to happen? If people are living too far apart, it obviously is not going to happen. If you live 20 minutes apart from many people in your missional community, your life is not going to overlap. It's just not. It's not how life works. Okay? You shop mostly, or at least partially, close to home. You play, you walk your dog, you take your kids out, you go to your favorite coffee shop, all those things you do closer to home, usually. Does that make sense? And so if we organize our communities around proximity, there's going to be more overlap of life to help them be better family, but it's also going to affect things in terms of mission. So right now, some of the non-Christian families we're on mission to, because they come from our part of the city, I can introduce them to somebody else in our gospel community, and guess what? They've got commonality. Because they shop at the same places, walk their dog at the same places, take their kids to the same park. They've got immediate connection with those non-Christian neighbors because they live in the same part of town. Versus meeting somebody who lives 30 minutes away. What commonality? They're in the same city, I guess, but there's no there's no day-to-day commonality in it. Does that make sense? And that's part of the problem again. A lot of churches, they organize their communities just based on who likes who. I want to be in a group with them because I like them, and they've got 2 kids and we've got 2 kids, and they're like us. And they're white collar and we're white collar. So they're like us, so we want to be in a community with them. That's how a lot of small groups, life groups, form in a lot of churches, rather than, again, taking all these other things into consideration, saying, no, who lives near you? We believe God has placed you in the northwest part of the city for you to live in community with others in the northwest part of the city, for you to be on mission together in the northwest part of the city. Does that make sense? Seeing the massive difference?
Yeah, follow-up question, and I'm curious as I ask you guys this too. Unless you live in Oklahoma City or Tulsa, I mean, because I'm sitting here thinking Owasso is a 5A school, but it's not, they're not that big. I mean, are you guys hearing what I'm hearing? I mean, I don't know how applicable that is, and I could be wrong, but I mean, Owasso's not a big community.
I would say it still comes. I work my home church back in my hometown in Central Illinois, 2,000-3,000 people.
Okay.
And I just got an email actually from one of the co-pastors at the church considering these exact same things for the small town of 3,000.
Okay, that's good then.
Well, and
In a small town, it is unique because there's one high school, so there's overlap. There's quite a bit of overlap built in just because it's a small town, and there's not, the place isn't very big, so you're running into people. But even so, you take that and you say, but imagine even in a small town how it could be even deeper. If the people on the south end, the town's called Tremont, if the people on the south end of Tremont were working together, because again, they go every night during the summer, they go for walks in the neighborhood.
Okay, that's good.
They're out in the yard with their kids in the neighborhood on the south end of Tremont. So imagine if your community, though, was doing that together with the non-Christian neighbors on the south end of Tremont.
Okay.
You're gonna get many more touches with those people. Relationships are gonna progress faster, deeper, even in a small town, even in a small town or smaller town context.
That's helpful.
and sorry for interrupting you, I didn't mean to.
No.
I was just gonna say, your question earlier about age is good. Obviously, when we don't give our groups, and when I say our, not my church, I mean all of us, when we don't give our groups a purpose or a deeper discipleship value to focus on, they naturally go to their own desires, which is comfort, 100% of the time.
Good.
And so, if we aren't telling them the biblical reason for why we are focusing on these deeper things, they go to their desires, and really I think proximity could be a great response, because at the core of proximity is a deeper purpose of God's put you where He's put you so that you can bring influence, which I really liked that, and that's very, very true. And so proximity, in actuality, could be your answer to staying mixed in age, because that's a deeper biblical value, but it also is measurable. And when we've multiplied groups in the past, even when we give people a choice, proximity is one of those things they choose on their own. So it not only is it a deeper biblical reason, but it's also on some level an easily communicable preference to a group. That provides reasoning for why you might be multiplying the way you are. So I think those two things might be connected.
That's great.
In actuality.
Love what you're saying. Yep.
Anyway.
That's good. Thank you.
Yep. Super good. What else is stirring in your minds?
Quick question on, so the park, and you got the 4 non-Christian families. Is it just as simple as that gathering was simply that, just we're gonna go to the park, y'all are invited, and then obviously you've got the intentionality from your core group.
Great.
So, and I'm curious too, are all of those 4 non-Christian couples, are they all essentially just people in proximity to the people in the core, that they've befriended them and?
Not all. You're gonna have unique relationships happen all the time. So one of them that came was a single mom who has a 10-year-old son who goes to the same school as my 10-year-old daughter. Well, for some reason they like the school even though they live like 25 minutes away. But they're at that school, she's driving down to that school every day. Does that make sense? And she actually, as she has spent more, it's interesting that she lives 25 minutes away in a very nice, rich, clean, safe area. But as she has spent more time with us and our community at the park and different things, she's actually considering moving. Partially, a lot of it connected with this life that she's seeing this group of people live, even though you could say it's a less desirable part of the city, but there's deep community there. And she says people up here, they're not looking for a relationship, they're arrogant, snooty, they don't, they're not eating meals together, they're not throwing parties together. Everything that we're doing, she sees none of that up there in the rich area. And she's like who wants to live life like that? I want to live life with a group of people that love each other, that live a lot of life together, that eat and party and go to the park. Their kids play together a lot. Like, does that make sense? So I mean, we met those people through different. We meet a lot of kids through our kids. Our kids play a lot of soccer, and so we met some of them through their soccer teams, through school, through our local park. My wife's kind of naturally evangelistic. I mean, she's an evangelist, so she doesn't go anywhere. She doesn't go anywhere without meeting somebody. And so we've had crazy. One of those non-Christian women who came to the park. My wife met her in the checkout line at Costco, or at the store. Struck up a conversation with her. Saw that she had a daughter about the same age as one of our daughters. Exchanged numbers right there in the checkout line. Exchanged numbers with her, set up a play date at the park the next week, invited her to a party that our gospel community was throwing 2 weeks later, and the things just snowballed to the point where now we're getting invited to their parties. This woman just had a birthday party 3 weeks ago at the beach, and our whole gospel community got invited to her birthday party. That's when you know your gospel community is loving people well, when you start getting invited to their things. Does that make sense? Because then you know they trust you and they want to be in relationship with you. So now it's even better. It's going both ways. She's coming to our stuff, we're coming to her stuff. So, great questions. What other thoughts?
Something I feel at our church, I think I feel you're in like the Bible Belt. How do you get your people to see the primary place they want to invite people to isn't the Sunday worship gathering? And even your own people, how do you get them to view not the Sunday gathering as the primary thing, but rather like what you're doing on mission in community?
I mean, I would say a lot of it is the expectations you set out as a church, and what people, the things you talk about most is what people catch as what's most important. So literally every Sunday, as part of our we do a normal Sunday morning. Every Sunday morning, 10 a.m., we meet in a public school, except now we can't. We're meeting at the park. But every Sunday morning, what you're going to hear is, man, it is great to be together with you guys as the larger family, to worship together, to learn together, to pray together. But we just want to remind you and encourage you, this is not the life of the church. This is just a gathering of the church. And so the primary life of the church is in gospel communities scattered throughout San Diego. They hear it every Sunday. If you're new, first time, you hear it. If you come every, however often you come, you're going to hear it literally week in and week out. So that's just one way people are hearing it. But then as we talk about how we function as a church, again, people are going to hear, okay, there's a Sunday piece. It's important, but it's not primary. It's important, and I think that's what people need to hear. Sunday's good. Sunday's necessary. Sunday's important. It's not primary, though. Sunday is just 2 hours, 1 day a week. We're talking about life together as a community on mission throughout the week. And so that gets communicated through social media, through the website, through literally everything we do. So it's just reinforced in different ways. The stories we tell. We're not going to tell stories on a Sunday morning about how many people came. We're going to tell, what kinds of stories do you think we're going to tell about this gospel community over here and how they're living life together on mission in that part of the city. So the stories that are reinforcing it again regularly. So through the stories you tell through the little things you do on a Sunday morning, it's going to reinforce something. It's always reinforcing something. It's not a neutral thing. It's reinforcing something. So is it reinforcing life and community on mission, or is it reinforcing this really is the most important thing in our week, these 2 hours? So, but for those, this is Bible Belt dish. I think, and this goes back even with some of your people, Scott, is just that constant reinforcing of their calling, and it's a calling, of their calling to live this way. This isn't like the next cool church growth strategy. There's actually a biblical calling embedded in all this we're talking about here. It's calling, it's actually a calling from Jesus. It's got some weight. It's got some weight to it. It's calling from Jesus to have him be the center of life. But the life of a community of people that has a bigger purpose than going to work and making money and living the American dream, but living on his mission for his purposes. It's a calling that's on our lives. So people need to hear that regularly, and they need to feel it. If they don't get that at a convictional heart level, they won't live this way. So that's part of our work as shepherds, teachers, disciplers, leaders, is to say, well, are we praying in that way for our people? Are we talking in that way to our people? Are our churches structured and organized? Do our structures and the organization of our church demonstrate that? If this is really a conviction, if you were just to come in, bring somebody, a consultant in from the outside and say, look at our church structure, look at what we prioritize, look at how we spend our money, look at how we spend our time, what would you say are the primary things in our church? Does that make sense? With a lot of the churches that I work with, there's not a lack of desire. There's not a lack of good intentions. Unfortunately, good intentions don't equate with fruitful discipleship or fruitful mission. Okay? It actually does. You have to put your money where your mouth is, you could say. And your church actually has to be organized in such a way to promote these things, to allow and encourage these things. That's the putting your money where your mouth is to say, so if we've got a highly programmed church, which is primarily program driven and at the church building, that's the antithesis of this. That's the antithesis of saying, no, life, we're going to do some of that, but we believe that the most formative way to disciple, the most formative way to be on mission is actually life together, around tables, in backyards, at the park, at the local swimming pool. Those are the places that are going to be most formative. But again, a lot of churches, because they've, for years in many cases, done things one way, it's just difficult for them to think outside of the box. Or it's risky to move a little bit outside of the box. So I work with a lot of churches that, again, would agree in principle with all of this. But then when they think about what it's going to take to get from where they're currently at to some form of this, it's scary. And they realize that they, in some cases, may not have the organizational ability to pull it off. Because they've been groomed, they've been trained. I was a good Moody guy, We didn't talk about any of this at Moody. We were supposed to prepare, we were supposed to spend 25 hours a week preparing a good exegetical, expository message at the building, which was going to be the primary influencer to help people make disciples. Again, don't hear bad in all of that, okay? Sunday's necessary. Some things at the building are necessary. They're not bad things. Jesus did stuff at the temple. So don't hear bad, but hear very, very limited. And that's how I talk with churches and about how they need to talk with their people. Are those bad things? They're not bad things. They're good things. They're just limited things. To make fully formed disciples requires much more than that. And here's something interesting discussion for you to have with your staff, with your elders. I believe that the discipleship Jesus did with his disciples was 20% formal. You could say 20% at the building. Okay? That's sitting them down, talking to them, teaching them. At the temple, at the lake, wherever it was. But only 20%. And we can fight about this, if you want to, but study the Gospels in this way. Parse it out. What percentage of time did Jesus spend formally teaching his disciples, and what percent were they experientially living life together on mission, loving people, becoming friends of sinners? That's why the Pharisees had such a big problem with Jesus and his strategy, his approach. What did the Pharisees say? It's like, why are you guys always eating and drinking with lost people? They were doing it so much that the Pharisees noticed and regularly criticized them. What are you guys doing? You guys are that's not the religious way. That's not the church. That's not the church way. You're supposed to be at the temple. You're supposed to sit people down and just teach and preach hard. So Jesus was like, no, that's not the way. We're gonna be friends of sinners. We're gonna become gluttons and drunkards for the right reasons.
That's quotable.
Like, what a great thing to be known for in your city. Seriously, the church in your city, the people in your city should see your church. If they were to describe your church, they should say, "Man, that church is really a friend of sinners." They're not describing your church that way. I hope you feel conviction. You should. We should. I should. If we're not known as the friends of sinners, and seriously, you can say this tongue in cheek or whatever, but we are supposed to be the party people. Partying, gluttons and drunkards for the right reasons, for kingdom purposes, to see broken people transformed. How were Matthew's tax collector friends? How are they gonna hear about the kingdom? How are they gonna hear the gospel? If Matthew didn't organize the party at his house because he was a trusted friend of them prior as a tax collector, how are they gonna be introduced to Jesus if Matthew didn't organize the party and if the disciples weren't there in the mix demonstrating what a life together with this Jesus guy in community looked like? You gotta ask the same thing about Bethany, Norman, Lawton, wherever you're located, and say, 80% of the people in your city, even in Bible Belt, it's probably, you may disagree, 80% probably are not going to step foot in your church anytime soon, if ever. So if you want to be just that church that just kind of moseys along with the 20% of church attenders, I suppose we need some of that, but I hope you'll be part of the church that's going to go after the 80% in Oklahoma that aren't going to step foot in any traditional church. It's going to mean eating with them. I tell a lot of churches, like, if you were to if you want to distill this thing down into its simplest form in terms of mission, it's a community of people. So it's Jesus and his disciples, but it's meals and parties. Seriously. What did they major in? What did they spend most of their time in doing? Meals and parties. Weddings, birthdays, meals and parties. So creating relational contexts where people could be loved well, people could be served well, people could be engaged in their stories, to know them and hear, where is that? Because part of the problem in our evangelism historically, again, has been it's more one size fits all. It's 4 spiritual laws. It's this little book we pull out, and it's this little size fits all proclamation of the gospel. Again, not bad. Don't hear bad, just hear limited. Is that the gospel? Yes, it's a piece of it. But the gospel's all of life. It's not just your sin and your salvation. It's all of life. And so we are not going to be effective proclaimers of that gospel effectively if we don't know people's stories and don't know where the source of their unbelief. So I meet you at wherever, classmate at your school. I don't know why their family doesn't go to church or believe in God or love Jesus. I don't know that. So I can present something to them generically, some truth. Again, it's not a bad thing, but far more effective if I can get to know their story and find out where did that unbelief come from? Where did that start? Why is it so deep? Oh, because they had parents that were nominal Christians and were abusive, verbally abusive, physically abusive. It's they claim to be Christians and they did that to me. I don't ever want anything to do with it. What will we do with it when I get out of the household? I can't tell you how many times I've heard that story. Again, some form of abusive parents that were, hypocritical in some form. Kids turn 18, go off to college. I am going to stay as far away from the church, as far away from Christians, as far away from that Jesus as possible. Because if that's what it produces, what my parents said, I want nothing to do with it. There's a lot of people in your city like that, but how would you know? How would you know if you didn't know their story? So that then you can approach their story differently and again customize the gospel so that it's actually good news to their hearts. See, that's part of this too. It's not just meals and parties. It's what are we doing at those meals and parties? What were we doing at the park the other day? Were we just hanging out and having a good time at the park? Yes, that was part of it, was the fun side of it. But we were being intentional to engage those people in conversation, to build more trust with them so that we could have these conversations with them that are customized to their story. So Michelle, the single mom who I told you about that's coming from that richer area, we've engaged her story very deeply, and we know she's grown up in a situation where she's been surrounded by probably largely atheists and agnostics, or at least functionally. They might claim otherwise, but you get that a lot in richer areas where people are functional atheists. So she's grown up in that. So she sees Christians as second, historically, she's seen Christians as second class and small-minded, because that's what she's grown up in. That's what her parents said. That's what her cousins and extended family said, believed. So we know that about Michelle. So now we're speaking to Michelle, talking with Michelle in light of that, now that we know that about her story. Does that make sense? So So then at the park each time, or at the movie night in our driveway, or she brought her son to our Halloween party in our driveway last Halloween, each time is one more piece where we are trying to love her well, get deeper into her story, and demonstrate a different picture of how small-minded Christians actually live and think and love. Does that make sense? So we're wrecking her right now. In a good way. We're wrecking her. Because what has she heard all her life? She's probably in her mid-40s. But somebody said, what, small-minded Christians. Hypocritical Christians. Whatever Christians. And now she's meeting this community of people that are like the most more loving than her family. It's blowing her mind. And then she sees how we talk with each other, how we relate to our kids, how we relate with her kid. Her kid's kind of a wild child, just hasn't been parented well. She's a single parent and she hasn't done a great job. So he's kind of a wild child. We love him. We love him. He shows up to the park, he's wild, kind of out of control. Guess what? A lot of grace, a lot of love to Michelle's 10-year-old boy. Like, who does that? Nobody in her family's ever done that. They've just criticized her for her wild child. Think anybody in her neighborhood's doing that? No, sorry. Can't you get your kid under control? Can't you keep him out of keep him off his skateboard, out of my yard? Like, that's what she's experiencing in her neighborhood from her family. She comes into this community of people that loves her 10-year-old, extends grace, speaks truth. And so you can just see her every time we're with her. So at the park 2 weeks ago, I'll just give you another piece, because this is the stuff that needs to happen as we are with people in these different environments. It's not just organize your people to throw a lot of parties. It is that, but you got to be intentional at the park, at the party, at the Halloween thing. You've got to be intentional there. And so she sat down by another one of our core ladies, and that lady, she's in her early 30s. They've got 2 kids now, but not long ago they lost a child, very tragically. And I don't know how it came up in their conversation, but Michelle and her ended up talking about that part of Heidi's story for like 30 minutes. Michelle's blown away by it. Blown away by the vulnerability, of this mom willing to talk about her child, talk about it in that way, and connecting it all to God. Despite the grieving, giving God glory. Despite the grieving, talking about how God supported them and that helped them through those difficult days. That is effective gospel proclamation. Does that make sense? It's Heidi. There's nothing. Heidi's just a normal mom with 2 kids at the park. She's just a normal person like you're normal people. But she understands what it looks like to engage intentionally wherever she's at. Park, neighborhood, wherever she's at. So that's what we have to do. That's, again, so going back to some of the vision casting we have to do with our people, it's telling those stories, and it's raising expectations that, man, this is how God's designed life, and it's how God's designed life for His church. Just normal people being intentional about where they live and where they work and where their kids play and their kids' school and this, being intentional there and not doing it alone, doing it together as a community. So Heidi knows, yes, she's at the park talking to Michelle. She's got a whole community around her too, also loving Michelle. Does that make sense? It's not just on Heidi to do it all. Because Michelle ended up talking with for having significant conversations that day with like 4 or 5 others also. So she was loved well by the community and very deeply loved by Heidi. So, but man, we've got to, don't you want that for your people? To be able to do, to have the motivation to do, to be able to, what Heidi did at the park. But she's just a normal person. So to encourage you, all of your people, if they've been regenerated, transformed by Jesus, have that ability. They've got the Holy Spirit in them. They've got Jesus leading them. They can all do what Heidi did at the park. And we have to envision that being primarily what the life of our church is about. So that as they live daily life throughout Oklahoma City, this area, or wherever, just that's kind of how we roll as the church. Whether we're at a coffee shop, at the park, at work, at our kids' school, at the Little League game, our people are saying, how do we love that family from the Little League team? How do we bring our community around that family to love them well, pursue them well, and to do it together as a community? Some of these guys have heard this before, but you know what I'm going to say. Connecting to this idea, the average non-Christian will need to become friends with 5.3 Christians before they become a Christian. That's what some research, I don't know if it came from Barna or Stetzer or who it came from, but and I found that to be anecdotally true actually internationally and around the world too. So, and you can think of your story, it's not surprising. More than one person influenced you towards Jesus. You had these conversations with this person, and this person did this for you, and this person was an example for you, and for me it was probably 10, 12 people. Does that make sense? For you, similarly. So 5.3 doesn't surprise us, but the 5.3 should compel us to say, again, are our churches organized in such a way to make this possible? So again, go back to how I said it. The average non-Christian is going to need to become friends with, not show up at your church building.
Right.
And be greeted and shake hands with 5.3 people.
Right.
I didn't say that.
Right.
So think of the average, if non-Christians are coming through your church door, it's not a bad thing, it's just a very limited thing. They're not becoming friends with anybody there. They're shaking hands with a few people and sitting down and listening to somebody talk to them and then waving and heading home for lunch. Right? They're not becoming friends really with anybody there. But they need to become trusted friends with five Christians, because those 5 Christians are investing in them and having conversations with them and answering their questions and demonstrating what it means to follow Jesus. That's usually how it works. Sometimes the Spirit overrides and does something very miraculous, but again, this is usually the case. So again, you have to say, we think about Lawton or Bethany, how can we get 5.3 Christians around that neighbor? And 5.3 around that coworker, and 5.3 around that classmate, and 5.3 around that person that I see at the coffee shop twice a week, and 5.3 around, you get what I'm saying? We've got to really take that seriously. Because if we don't, we can't expect much change in the lives of people that we're in relationship with. So many churches that I work with talk about their lack of conversion growth. They might be growing numerically because they're the bigger church on the block and they're more attractive, and so, people are always coming and going and their numbers are inching up, over the year. But when you talk conversion growth, a lot of pastors are like, can we change the subject? Growing through conversion growth, unfortunately, it's not very common. And if churches are, it's just a sprinkle of conversion growth. Most churches that are growing are not growing through conversion growth. And that's what's supposed to be happening. If we're truly making disciples, if we're truly living on mission, we should be asking that question and measuring conversion growth. Like, are lost people being transformed by Jesus? Isn't that? That's what Jesus was getting at. Go and make disciples. Wasn't go and gather people from other churches and put it together and call it your new cool thing. It was go to the lost, become friends of sinners, eat meals, throw parties, bring healing to, serve the poor. Do that work. That's where life in the church needs to focus. So, anyway, preaching a lot again. Thoughts about that, and then we'll take a break. I could use one of Nick's super duper coffees.
You made a statement earlier on about how there was 3 main causes of the breakdown in this kind of thing. And
Yep.
you said the one of them was the lack of established core leadership.
Good.
What would the other 2 be?
Good. Yep. Great question. So we'll talk more about how to do this because these are such key pieces. But I'll name them right now, and then we can go deeper into them later. But the other, so first one was lack of core strength, or you could say capacity. Second one, I'm going to say it like this. Is a lack of mission focus, where communities, again, they don't have bad intentions, but either the things that they're focused on are too big or too like shotgun. Does that make sense? So I'll talk with a lot of communities or even a lot of churches, and it's like, yeah, we're about the city. Well, church can't reach a city. Church has limitations of what it can do, capacity to influence. So a missional community, similarly, often I'll say, man, we want to reach our neighborhood. Sounds great, doesn't it? You want to reach your neighborhood, okay? Good, but you got to bring it down to realistic. From the neighborhood, who has God specifically called you to reach this year? Big difference. Because in my neighborhood, in most neighborhoods, there's 100, 200, 300 people there. Our missional community is not going to touch that in a year. We could throw a big street party and have half of them show up. That's not doing what we're talking about here. Are we becoming friends with any of them? Barely. We do the big street party or the big program or the big event. We're not becoming friends with them. We're just throwing a big event for them. Okay? So if you want to reach your neighborhood, your missional community has to say, okay, that starts by us focusing on 12 to 15 of these neighbors this year and loving the heck out of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Becoming deep friends with them, serving them in deep, generous, hospitable ways. So this actually happens. So you get to the end of the year and you can say, those 12 to 15 neighbors, man, they love us. We love them, they love us. They're coming to our parties, we're going to their parties. Big difference. Because a lot of churches, a lot of communities will take this shotgun approach, and they will do these things over here so basically over the course of a year they might have like 2 or 3 points of contact with somebody, and that's it. What do you think is going to happen in a relationship if you're with a family like 2 or 3 times? Right. Would you expect much? Would you call that a trusted friendship? Obviously not. Okay. So is there going to be usually any spiritual progress? Usually not. Does that make sense? And so we need to organize it in such a way that over the course of a year we're with that neighbor or that coworker 10, 12, 15 different times. So if a missional community can focus and say, this is our focus, and everything we do, they're getting invited to everything. Our meal nights twice a month, they're getting invited. 4th of July, they're getting invited. Super Bowl, they're getting invited. Halloween, they're getting invited. Thanksgiving, they're getting invited. Christmas, they're getting invited. Birthday, they're getting invited. Go to the park, they're getting invited. Go to the beach, they're getting invited. Does that make sense? That focused group of non-Christians from your neighborhood or your workplace, they're getting invited into most of what you do as a community. And they are going to say no a lot of times. And that's normal too. That's not discouraging. That's just normal. Okay? But if you're only doing a handful of things in an entire year, and you invite them to those things and they say no most of the time, we're back to that same problem. We invited them 7 times, they came 2. So we were with them twice this year. Right? Versus over the course of a month, my gospel community right now is an example. We have, over the course of a normal month, 10 to 12 different things non-Christians could be invited into. Because we do meal night, what we call a family meal night. We do that twice a month. So that's 8 times. Or we do that, sorry, I was wrong. That number was too big. So we do our family meal nights twice a month. And then we do movie night, game night, park night. So we've got those things built in. So that's 5 times every month. And then there's a few other spontaneous things. So we'll just say 2 more spontaneous things at the park or in the neighborhood that we're doing over the course of a month. So we've got 6 or 7 possibilities every single month to invite people into. See the difference? And those aren't things that are like, because this is another question, like, our people are busy. Our people would say they're too busy to live in the way you're describing. We're just doing normal stuff.
Right.
It's like we're just doing stuff that people fill their lives with anyway. Everything you've heard me talk about, all the examples, isn't that what people are doing anyway? Even if they're like incredibly self-centered?
Yeah.
They're eating meals and throwing parties and going to the park and watching movies and, isn't that what even very self-centered people and Christians do? So we're just doing it with big kingdom purpose. Saying, this is all good stuff that we like to do anyway. We like to throw parties. We like to have game nights. We like to do movie nights. We like to go to the park, throw some frisbee, play some volleyball. So we're just doing it regularly together with intentionality. Okay? So, second thing, lack of mission focus. Third thing, is the lack of a specific plan. Again, I talk with a lot of churches, a lot of missional communities that might have this, actually a fairly good focus in terms of who they believe they're called to, but then lack a specific plan about how they're actually going to live life together. They think that, man, if we just talk about these things enough, it's just going to happen, and people are just going to spontaneously and organically organize it. Sorry, doesn't work that way. Anything that's fruitful, effective in our lives is usually organized, right? Businesses, education, schools, your finances, your health. What's it take? It takes a plan. Okay? If you don't have a plan for your finances, you're in debt. If you don't have a plan for your education or your kids' education, okay, it becomes mediocre. If you don't have a plan for your business, okay, problems. Same way here. Requires not a complex plan, but requires some details, because I can't universally true if you were to say what's the thing you hear most from churches around the world as you talk about these things, our people are too busy. Do you feel that? You hear that? It is the top thing that I hear most often. People are too busy to live in the way you're describing. Part of the reason is because they don't understand their calling to follow Jesus in that way. Part of the reason is because the expectation has never been set out there, because most churches just expect their people to show up on Sunday and maybe help out with kids ministry. So there's not even an expectation set out there for that. But part of it comes back to this planning piece. If you don't plan, people are going to fill up their life with other stuff, because there's plenty of options. Obviously, people can get busy with plenty of things. Okay? There's plenty of options out there. So if they do not have a specific plan as a missional community that they're orienting their lives around, they will fill it up with other things. But if they do have a plan that they can integrate into the family schedule, then they'll prioritize those things differently. So right now, one of the core couples, I haven't mentioned him yet, he is a busy doctor at one of the largest hospitals in San Diego. He just got promotion, so he's over a whole team of doctors. His name's Stephen. He is a dad with 3 children under 6 years old. And he's got a wife that's a part-time nurse practitioner. Are any of your people busier than this guy? No, seriously. Probably not. I doubt it. There's not too many people on the planet busier than this guy. So he's a doctor, he's a dad, he's a husband, but he's part of the core, and they are able to organize their life together as a family with 3 small children. They're able to organize their life around living this way because we have a plan for our community. And so they're able to plan all the other stuff they want. He's got family. He's got a fairly big family. His parents live just 20 minutes away. So you've got that dynamic with family expectations. And he's Chinese, and so there's very high family expectations of, Chinese culture and respect and honor. Expected to be at the parents', Sunday lunch, like you're there. So they wouldn't be able to live this way, be part of something like this, if we didn't have some detailed plan that he could organize his doctoring schedule and his Chinese family schedule and his 3 kids under 6 schedule and integrate it. Does that make sense? So when we have a break here, I just keep talking about new things. When you sit down with your missional communities and somebody there talked about starting a new one or starting some new ones or considering starting some new ones, you got to get the core piece locked in. But then it's important to ask the core, like you don't give them what they should do. You give them some principles about how they should create that plan around what's it look like to be a good community that looks like family and on mission. So you give them some of those guardrails, but the big questions you need to ask them is based on your gifting, based on your passion, based on your circumstances and all those variables I described earlier, what do you feel called to? Like, what are you excited about? And then secondly, what do you have capacity for? And let's create a plan, taking all that into consideration. What everybody's excited about, and what everybody feels like they have capacity for. So I sat down and did that with my gospel community when we first started. And Stephen, the doctor, said, man, one of the things we love to do, we love to host game nights. Glad he does. I don't. Okay? So Stephen said, we have capacity for that, and we like to do it, and a lot of our doctor friends like to do it. Who knew? Okay?
It's a stress relief.
I guess, doctors and games, board games. So, but Stephen said based on calling, keeping it, this was cool, you know, he was taking into consideration his co-working doctors and what they like to do. So it's what he likes to do, it's what they like to do, it's what they have capacity for. He said, we'll take responsibility for organizing Friday night game night at our place. And that'll be a piece of how we help lead this gospel community on mission. Calling, capacity. Does that make sense? Yeah. Super busy guy. Super busy family. But they're part of how they're helping lead this gospel community on mission is by taking responsibility. Ask that question to another young couple, 2 kids under 5, and they, again, what are you excited about? What do you like to do? What do your neighbors like to do? What do you have capacity for? Man, husband said, I love to cook breakfast for people. I love to host brunch. Eggs, bacon, waffles, pancakes, the whole thing. Big, yummy, hot breakfast for the neighborhood. Awesome. You want to do that regularly? Yep, when could you do that? How about Saturday mornings? So they said, 3rd Saturday morning, every month, 10 a.m., brunch at our place. So you see in some of that shared leadership now coming into play. Guess what me and my wife have to do to help out with that? Show up, eat some yummy breakfast, play games. Does that feel like, whoa, that's a burden? Man, this missional community thing, that's a burden. Like now, Stephen and Kay, game night. Trevor and Heidi, Saturday morning brunch. My wife and I said, we'll take a piece of that. Every month, we will either organize a movie night in our driveway, a park night, or a beach night. You can do that in San Diego. Okay? And so that's something that my wife and I have said that's one of the mission pieces we'll take responsibility for. Again, you see the sharedness of it. So over the course of a month, we're doing, and then we do these family meal nights where everybody chips in with the food and the cleanup. It's usually at our place, because our place is set up well to be able to have the 12 children that are in play. So we've got a good hosting space, but my wife was very clear literally on night 1. She said, we're not doing this alone, guys. You can use our space as often as we need to as a community, but we're not feeding everybody. And we're not cleaning up after everybody. We're going to function like a family. She said this like literally from the get-go, so that our core was clear, like this is team, this is family, Everybody's chipping in with the food, with the cleanup, with the relationships. We're in it together, everybody. So over the course of a month, we're able to have all these different things going on, but it's no big burden. It's no big burden on anybody. But then you think about what's going on in the lives of these people. Man, they're loving each other well multiple times in a week and multiple times in a month. And similarly with the non-Christians we're engaging, we've just got that regular opportunity to invite people. And they say no sometimes, but that's okay because we've got the next thing to invite them to. That's not 2 months off. It's a week off, or it's 2 weeks, you know what I mean? So, because non-Christians are busy too. And a lot of times they're going to say no for whatever reason. Kids are sick, things are crazy at work, they're going to say no. But if you're only, like a lot of churches, doing stuff every quarter, talked with a lot of churches, they do stuff like quarterly, it's like, and you expect fruit from that? It's like that's 4 times a year, and we'll just say Christians say can't come 2 of those times. So again, you saw them 2 times in a year. Don't expect much influence 2 times in a year. Okay? Let's take a break.